I give the floor to the next speaker, Iran. Iran has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Mr. President, Excellencies, Professor Dr. Rahmat Mohammed, Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank the ALCO for the continuous inclusion to the topic environment and sustainable development in the agenda of the annual sessions of the organization. This issue, which has been closely followed by ALCO for over the last 40 years, is of particular importance to all the member states and to the international community at large. Our common concerns to environmental issue, which is focused on four topics, namely climate change, desertification, biological diversity, and sustainable development, is indicative of the special role accorded to the environment by all co-member states. Mr. President, climate change is a global problem that requires collective actions based on criteria certain such as equality in the use of the global atmospheric space, recognizing the historical responsibility of the development countries for the emission of greenhouse gases, GHG, and respecting the rights to development of developing countries. The international communities witness lack of clear commitment to fight the impact of climate change by those countries that created this situation. The progress towards achieving technical, technological, and financial commitments made in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and subsequently in the Kyoto Protocol by developed countries has been extremely disappointing. The Islamic Republic of Iran is of the view that all the parties, especially the developed countries, must respect and be committed to the arrangements in the framework of climate change negotiations. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, sustainable development is not an abstract concept. It is a well-defined and elaborated concept in the various global agreements. Eradicating poverty, changing unsustainable patterns of production and consumption, and protecting and managing the natural resource based on economic and social development are overarching objectives of and essential requirements for sustainable development. The world leaders agreed in Johannesburg in 2002 that sustainable development in its economic, social, and environment aspects is a key element of the overarching framework for United Nations activities. The 2012 conference addressed the failure of implementing the Rio and Johannesburg outcomes and considered changes which have occurred since 1992. The outcome of Rio Plus 20 identifies ways for the United Nations system to increase capacity building support for national sustainable development and strategic in developing countries. It could be realized particularly in the framework of goals and means of implementation of sustainable development. We affirm that the goals of sustainable development should address the failure of sustainable development, especially in developing countries. Mr. President, dry lands and the home for 2 billion people are highly susceptible to land degradation and desertification. It is estimated that by 2020, 135 million people will be at risk of being driven from their lands due to continuing desertification. Approximately 70% of 1.2 billion hectares of dry lands utilized for agricultural and degraded and are at risk of desertification. Insufficient financial resources, lack of institutional capacity, and lack of access to efficient clean technology are among the major problems that hinder the ability of developing countries to tackle these challenges. Desertification is one of the major challenges that have clear negative effects on agricultural production. Population growth and increased food demands are expected to drive the expansion and intensification of land cultivation in dry lands. If no countermeasures are taken, desertification in dry lands will threaten further improvements in human well-being. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran regards biological diversity as the basis for its sustainable development, and the country's biological resources are described in terms of aquatic resources, coastal areas, agricultural activities, forests, rangelands, and wetlands. This makes the biodiversity a direct source of food, fuel, and medicines. The core benefits of agriculture and natural resources are attributed to the wide range of ecosystem goods and services derived from biodiversity at different levels, including at genetic, species, and ecosystem levels. Biodiversity is crucial to the alleviation of poverty due to the basic goods and ecosystem services it provides. It is integral to key development sectors such as agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and tourism, which more than 1.3 billion people depend on for their livelihoods. Mr. President, while expressing its full commitment to comply with basic principles of international environmental law, the Islamic Republic of Iran would like to stress that to have our planet Earth conserved, secured, and protected for all, it is to underscore the utmost importance of intra and intergeneration equity. In other words, due regard to the special role of the developed countries and the necessity of considering next generation are inevitable. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is Indonesia. Indonesia has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak on the environment and the sustainable development issue. On the specific issue of climate change, Indonesia would like to note the progress made by the parties under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. This delegation would like to note the importance of the process to develop a protocol, another legal instrument, or an agreed outcome with legal force under the UNFCCC, which is applicable to all parties as mandated by the Durban Platform for Enhanced Action. The legal instrument should have top-down global goals of climate action, which is translated into nationally determined action with a reference to clear international rules and guidelines. The instrument should also adhere the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. The mitigation action under the instrument shall be robust, ambitious, fair, and fitted to diversity of national circumstances. In light of the upcoming 20th session of COP-UNFCCC, we would like to encourage the ALCO member states to accelerate the process in the COP to have a draft negotiating text to be ready in order to conclude the negotiating by 2015. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, on the issue of biological diversity, Indonesia attaches a great importance to the issue of genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. Indonesia would like to reiterate its position that genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge should be utilized in an appropriate manner by ensuring the fair and equitable benefit sharing through mutual agreed terms in accordance with the objective of the UN CBD and Nagoya Protocol. Therefore, Indonesia calls upon all ALCO member states to ratify the Nagoya Protocols of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Japan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Mr. President, on climate change, we are currently working on the negotiations to establish a fair and effective post-2020 framework applicable to all parties, which is to be agreed upon in 2015. Japan fully supports it and continues to contribute constructively for the realization of 2015 agreement. With regard to the question of principles of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is important to ensure all parties' participation. We should not take a fixed, dichotomized way which does not reflect the current situation. From this point of view, we should interpret and reflect the concept of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability and equity in a dynamic way. Mr. President, we consider that the UN Climate Summit serves an important occasion outside of UNFCCC process to strengthen political momentum for success of the COP21. Japan would like to actively contribute to it by showing concrete action against climate change. Japan fully recognizes the importance of the Green Climate Fund, GCF, as one of the major financial mechanisms and welcomes the commencement of initial resource mobilization process. More than 20 countries, including Japan, had participated in the first meeting for the initial contribution process held in Oslo on June 30th and July 1st this year, and had full discussions. We will continue to contribute for early operationalization of GCF. Mr. President, the Commission of Sustainable Development, which was established at the Rio Summit, has played a significant role for over 20 years in disseminating the concept of sustainable development globally. The high-level political forum will play an important role in review of the implementation of the post-2015 development agenda as a forum for sharing good practices and deepening deliberations on common challenges for sustainable development. We expect the HLFPF, a high-level political forum, will contribute to gain broad participation from all stakeholders and provide political guidance to the international community in achieving sustainable development. Mr. President, with the question of international regime on desertification, Japan has been consistently a substantial contributor all along to the international funding to combat desertification. I would like to congratulate on the successful conclusion of the 11th session of the Conference of the Parties, COP11 of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. I would also like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the host, the government of Namibia, for their hospitality and excellent arrangements. Japan takes due account of the close link between desertification and such issues as climate change and biodiversity conservation. Combating desertification should not be regarded as a single issue, but should be dealt with in effective collaboration with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, CDB. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to Oman. You have the floor, sir.
شكرا سعادة الرئيس. صاحب السعادة رئيس الدورة، سعادة الأمين العام، الحضور الكرام، اسمحوا لي في بدء هذه المداخلة أن أتقدم بالتهنئة إلى سعادة الرئيس وعلى الجهد الذي يبذله لإدارة هذه الجلسات، وأن أعرب عن عميق التقدير لسعادة أمين العام المنظمة على الجهود البناءة التي بذلها ويبذلها، والتي نأمل في استمرارها ومواصلة دعمها من قبل جميع الدول الأعضاء. سعادة الرئيس، يعتبر موضوع البيئة والتنمية المستدامة من الموضوعات المهمة التي توليها سلطنة عمان اهتماما كبيرا فرضه موقعها الجغرافي كجزء من شبه الجزيرة العربية التي تتميز بمناخها الجاف ومحدودية الغطاء النباتي وقلة الموارد المائية المتاحة. لذلك حرصت بلادي على وضع الاستراتيجيات والخطط الوطنية لحماية البيئة ومكافحة التلوث ومكافحة الجفاف والتصحر بهدف تحقيق تنمية متوازنة ومستدامة تتساوى فيها الاعتبارات الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والبيئية. ولتوفير أفضل الضمانات والقواعد لتأمين سلامة البيئة العمانية، قامت سلطنة عمان بإنشاء وزارة خاصة للبيئة والشؤون المناخية، الأمر الذي من شأنه أن يتيح بالدمج بين البيئة والشؤون المناخية الفرصة للربط بين أثر التغيرات المناخية العالمية على البيئة. كما قامت بإنشاء مركز وطني للبحث الميداني في مجال البيئة، ويهدف هذا المركز إلى تنظيم وتشجيع البحث الميداني في مجال حفظ البيئة وتشجيع العاملين والباحثين والمتخصصين والدارسين العمانيين في المجال البيئي، وإبراز قدراتهم وإمكانياتهم العلمية ونشر أبحاثهم محليا ودوليا. ويعد الاحتفال بيوم البيئة العمانية الذي يصادف 8 يناير من كل عام مناسبة وطنية تؤكد الاهتمام الذي تحظى به البيئة في السلطنة. كما تعد الجائزة التي خصصتها منظمة اليونسكو باسم السلطان قابوس لحماية البيئة تتويجا لجهود سلطنة عمان في المحافظة على البيئة وتحقيق التوازن بينها وبين التنمية، وإسهاما واضحا في تشجيع الباحثين والعاملين في هذا المجال وتكريما لجهودهم المشكورة في خدمة الإنسانية. سعادة الرئيس، إن المحافظة على التنوع الإحيائي في عمان يعد أمرا مهما، حيث أن النظم البيئية تعتبر حساسة وهشة، والموارد الطبيعية المتجددة نادرة، وهي تواجه تحديات مختلفة متمثلة في الرعي الجائر وقطع الأشجار وتآكل التربة واستنزاف المخزون السمكي والتصحر والتدهور الأراضي وما يتبعها من فقدان للتنوع الإحيائي، ووصولا إلى التنمية المستدامة فيما يختص بالتنوع الإحيائي وحماية البيئة. وضعت بلادي نظاما متكاملا من المحميات الطبيعية في البلاد يتماشى مع أهداف الاتفاقية الدولية للتنوع البيولوجي والتي صادقت عليها السلطنة عام 1994. كما تم وضع استراتيجية وطنية وخطة عمل للتنوع الإحيائي لتحديد الإجراءات المطلوبة من كل جهة طبقا للالتزامات الواردة في الاتفاقية للوصول إلى التنمية المستدامة. سعادة الرئيس، إن قضية تغير المناخ تعتبر من القضايا البيئية الرئيسة التي توليها سلطنة عمان أهمية خاصة، فقد كانت من أوائل الدول التي وقعت على اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية لتغير المناخ خلال انعقاد مؤتمر قمة الأرض. لذا نأمل من منظمتنا أن يتم جذب الانتباه إلى السلوكيات البشرية التي تهدد كوكبنا، وتسليط الضوء على أهمية تغير هذه الأنماط السلوكية، وتشجيع المجتمعات على اتخاذ مواقف عملية بناءة نحو التزام كل إنسان بحماية البيئة. وفي هذا الصدد تؤكد بلادي التزامها التام بالمبادئ الأساسية التي أقرها المجتمع الدولي لتحقيق التنمية المستدامة، من منطلق إيمانها بأن هذه المبادئ تمثل الإطار العملي لضمان العمل المشترك وتحمل المسؤولية الجماعية تجاه حماية البيئة وصون مواردها الطبيعية. وتتطلع بلادي بكل تفاؤل إلى ما سيتمخض عن الدورة 53 لهذه المنظمة حول هذا الموضوع من قرارات، مقترحين في هذا الصدد سعي المنظمة نحو إيجاد آلية فاعلة بين الدول الأعضاء تكفل تبادل المعلومات في الشؤون المناخية ونقل التقنيات بين الدول الأعضاء في المجال البيئي. شكرا سعادة الرئيس.
I thank Oman, and now I give the floor to China. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, sustainable development is a common pursuit to all countries, which concern their fundamental interests and the well-being of mankind. The UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002, and the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in 2012 have provided guidance and action plans for sustainable development for the international community and individual countries. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, known as the Rio Conventions, have played an important role in promoting the global environmental protection and sustainable development. Countries around the world and the public have come to realize and pay more attention to the issue of environment and sustainable development. Mr. President, climate change is a common challenge confronting mankind and needs to be addressed through international cooperation. China has constantly and actively participated in the international cooperation in this area and played a constructive role in climate change negotiations. China welcomed the roadmap defined by the Warsaw Conference for reaching a new agreement in 2015 and expects that the United Nations Climate Summit in September this year could provide political momentum for the climate change negotiations. To conclude the negotiations on a new post-2020 agreement on climate change or schedule at the Paris Conference in 2015 is the common aspirations of the international community. China will work together with all other parties to push the negotiations to a conclusion as scheduled and reach a comprehensive and balanced agreement in accordance with the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, equity, and respective capacities. Mr. President, desertification constitutes a direct threat to the ecological environment, food security, and poverty eradication in rural areas, and is of grave concern to developing countries, particularly the African countries. The target of a land degradation neutral world set at Rio Plus 20 summit has provided a new opportunity for the international community to enhance cooperation and combat desertification together. China supports the decision or the establishment of intergovernmental working group on the follow-up of Rio Plus 20 adopted by the Conference of Parties to the UNCCD held last year. China participated actively in the work of the working group and expects that new and concrete results will be achieved by all the parties. On the basis of the work of the working group, in further realizing the goal of a land degradation neutral world under the framework of the UNCCD. Over the years, China has made exemplary efforts in combating desertifications and achieved good results. We are willing to share our experience and strengthen exchanges with other countries. Mr. President, the United Nations relevant working group had reached the initial agreement on the formulation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which has laid the foundation for the post-2015 development agenda. In June this year, the United Nations Environment Programme held the first session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. China welcomes the above-mentioned developments and progress. In our opinion, the international community should, in the process of advancing sustainable development, respect the right individual countries' ownership of the sustainable development, take all account of their national conditions and levels of development, handle the economic, social, and environmental dimensions in a balanced way, insist on promoting sustainable development in the pursuit of development, and pay special attention to addressing the concerns of developing countries. Mr. President, the Chinese government attaches great importance to the environmental protection and sustainable development. Promoting ecological progress derives from our reflection on the development and is also a way to upgrade development. China has given high priority to ecological progress in its national modernization agenda and insisted on seeking environmental protection in the process of development and development in the process of environmental protection. We have made great efforts to prevent and control smog, water, soil pollution, and as well as land degradation, push forward the changes in the patterns of production and the consumption of energy resources, promoted green, circular, and low-carbon development, to strive to build a beautiful China. Protecting environment and promoting sustainable development are where the interests of all countries converge. China will continue to strengthen win-win cooperation with all other countries on the basis of equality, friendship, and mutual benefit to further promote the implementation of international conventions, work together to address the issues of climate change and desertification, and jointly promote the cause of environment and development for mankind. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank China. We have two more speakers on the list. I wish to conclude this agenda item before adjourning the meeting. So I appreciate if the two more speakers which we have on the list would exercise utmost indulgence to be short. I appreciate that. Thailand has the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The issue of environment and sustainable development has been on the agenda of ALCO's annual session for quite some time. We have been following the progress of this important issue with great interest. However, we all agree that more has to be done. Thailand is of the view that the development of laws relating to environment and sustainable development is a crucial factor that contributes greatly to security and well-being of mankind.